Hi, here's Florian with a new podcast guest. So I would say, introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Thomas Bachem. I'm 34 years old now, and I'm an entrepreneur originally from Cologne, now living in Berlin, running a university these days. So officially calling myself a chancellor of a university, but founded several internet startups before.
And you founded a lot of internet startups before. So can you tell us a bit about them? What did they do, and how did you start them? Like, how did it come together?
Sure. Yeah, it's indeed a couple of companies. I would say one of the reasons is that none of them became as super successful as I had hoped. So I moved on to new ventures. But most importantly, I was always interested in different industries and different kind of products because I'm a very product-oriented kind of guy, and that made me always every, let's say, 4 years move on to something new. I think that has changed now. So doing what I'm doing now, I think I know actually, I feel it every day, is much more fulfilling to me, and probably a thing that I'm doing for at least another 10 years. But I started very early on when I was 13 years old roundabout, because that was the time when I taught myself how to do software development, and I became a software developer. And then back then, helped other companies around the corner to create their websites, because back then everybody needed their first website. So I became became a freelancer first, and then at some point an entrepreneur, which for me means not working for other customers, not being in some kind of service business, but working on own ideas and products that can scale beyond your own time and capabilities. And that's when I started Sevenload back when I was 19 in 2005. And Sevenload was a huge online video and also photo platform, which was basically launched in parallel to companies like Flickr and even YouTube. And we were kind of a combination of both. And at that time, then also one of the very first new and bigger, more ambitious startups in the so-called Web 2.0 movement in Germany, basically the time after the nuclear winter of the dot-com crisis back in 2006, slowly coming, the internet startup world coming alive again. And we had over 26 million euros of investments getting in from companies and investors like Deutsche Telekom, which had a big fund back then, T-Venture, or also Hubert Burda Media, a big publishing house, and many, many more investors. And that was it's still a lot of money today, but back then it was a spectacular big investment. And that made me obviously learn a lot, since I was 19, 20, 21, 22 years old. When I ran this company, I did it together with a co-founder who is 10 years older than me. Yeah. And so I also learned a lot from him. He was more of the sales kind of guy and outgoing networking guy. And I was still the technical guy, strictly speaking. For me, that was a I think very, very strong connection because I think as a technical person, I was kind of more careful and perhaps sometimes you could even say a bit more introvert. Yeah. And I think I learned a lot about the power of networking and friendships and what unbelievable things you can achieve by just knowing the right people and getting them to do some favors for you and stuff like that. So that was totally mind-blowing for me back then, what my co-founder always made possible through other people. And I think that also made me these days a very well-rounded and also very rare combination of an outgoing entrepreneur on one hand and someone who's very product focused and technically able to create products by myself. And then in 2010, we sold Sevenload to one of the investors, Hubert Boda Media, which was a strategic investor, publishing house. And I actually moved on right to my next venture, basically a month after selling the company, because together with the same co-founder, by the way, because I was very interested also in gaming.
Okay.
And that was because I was always a product-focused guy, as I said a couple of times already, and gaming, creating games is a very challenging thing. It is back then we had the big thing were browser games, and this was also a little later. Games like Farmville and social games came up, and we were very interested in that space. I made this decision because I just had a passion and an interest in doing a game, but not necessarily because I thought it's a great business idea.
Yeah.
And I learned that also the hard way, because Fliplife, it was called back then, was a real life online simulation browser game. We had to sell it, but for not a very successful price, about 2.5 years later, because we realized that gaming is a very hit-driven business, even more than startups in general, I would say. That meaning that that's also the reason why all the big successful gaming companies are basically launching game after game all the time, because it's a bit like running a music label. So you need multiple products out there and then see which of them work. And we just had this one game, and that wasn't successful enough to finance the whole company. So, but then still, what I learned there was obviously a lot about products again, and also about how you can still, even when the company itself isn't that big of a success, make it possible to sell the company. We sold it to another gaming bigger and more successful gaming company, also from Cologne. I did it back in Cologne back then, which was actually founded by a study friend of mine, and so we had a personal connection and a lot of trust. And he was in search for a lot of talent, and we had a lot of great developers and designers.
So you mainly bought it for the
it was a talent acquisition basically, and but still a very good outcome for especially all the employees involved, and obviously much better than closing down or even letting a company go bankrupt. And that was also a very interesting chapter of my entrepreneurial life. And then I stepped back a little and said, hey, okay, perhaps not directly jump into the next venture again. And instead I did two things. One is I co-founded the German Startups Association, which is like a political lobby organization for startups here in Germany. And that actually came from my observation that I was always someone, having learned that through my co-founder back then, who was attending a lot of conferences and events, and I had a very big network to other entrepreneurs. And at some point, I realized that all of them were constantly complaining how politics don't help at all, or even slow us down in the startup world. And that's totally right, and it's totally right to complain about that. But then at some point I had this thought, and I think I read it somewhere before, that entrepreneurs are people who don't complain but instead change things.
Yeah.
And it struck me at some point that I said, hey, but we should do something about that and not just wait for the politicians to come to us. And that's why. And then I said, Germany seems to be a country of associations.
Yeah.
So we founded the so-called German Bundesverband Deutsche Startups. And I had some more entrepreneurs join me, and we built up this organization, which is has more than 1,000 members these days. Is a very influential lobby organization. And I did this since then, so since 2012, voluntarily on the side.
Yeah.
So I put in a lot of work, I did a lot of travel, and I learned a lot about politicians and politics. And that was very interesting personally, especially as well. And also very exciting. I mean, we had so many, I don't know, I had the personal phone numbers of ministers, or I traveled with them to Silicon Valley and stuff like that. And that's obviously very exciting if you've never seen that. But at some point you realize that it's nice, but it's very hard still to change things, right? But for me, it was a good thing to do back then in 2012 because it helped me to leverage my network, stay connected to all these entrepreneurs, and obviously meet a lot of new entrepreneurs and influential people. And the other thing I did to basically satisfy my entrepreneurial and product focus role is I created a hobby side project which was called Lebenslauf.com, so an online resume creator. And it was like basically came out of an idea because an old friend of mine at some point asked me whether I could help her with her CV and converting it into a PDF file and stuff like that. And I Googled for her basically like, hey, there should be a tool for that, right? And then I realized that when you were looking for terms like, I don't know, like CV template, how to create a good resume, all this stuff, especially in German, there was only shitty sites on top. And then I had this idea of, hey, you should create a what you see is what you get online editor, which feels much more like Word, but like helps you to create a great CV. And it really started more as a hobby project because I really loved doing all of this by myself alone together, like coding, designing, so basically working as a one-man army on such a project. But then it actually became more and more successful, and at some point I was approached by bigger companies whether I would sell it. There also my network helped a lot because I was approached by one company and then I proactively approached all of their competitors also, basically. Yeah, and that was possible because I knew people through conferences. It's much harder to do this like by sending out cold emails. Yeah. And in the end, sold it to Xing, so the German LinkedIn, basically in 2014, and then stayed with them for a bit more than a year to basically hand it over to them. And it turned out to be a very, very successful company and sale also for me, especially since it was a one-man project and 100% owned by myself. No investors and stuff like that on board. So very different than the venture-backed companies I did before. And I think also a very interesting entrepreneurial story because it's something that I would say like typical founders wouldn't think about that much because it's not as, flashy and not so much to talk about, but a tool that is like very, very successful, also successfully used by people. So when I went to conferences on stage and talked about it, and I asked like whoever used Lebenslauf.com to create their CV, it's basically like, I don't know, like 20-30% of the people raised their hands. So it's basically the standard for doing CVs in German-speaking countries these days for many people. So that's very cool to see. And then I actually went to go on and to do what I do now, which I always wanted to do but never knew how to do, and that is to build a university for software developers that is much more hands-on and practice-oriented than all the universities out there. Because what I didn't talk about yet is that I also studied, of course, at some point, because, my parents wanted me to study. Yeah. I wanted to be a student, to be honest. So, I worked so much on the side, even as a school student already, that I still wanted to have some kind of student life, which turned out to not work out so well because I founded all these companies. But I was reluctant to study something like computer science or informatic in Germany because it's very, very math focused, very theoretic. And for me, like creating digital products was always about not just programming, but also like creating concepts, designs. I was always this like full stack kind of person, and not just in terms of software development, but also design. And for me, it was always much more about creativity and creating things, and not so much about all this theoretic stuff. And so I studied business instead at a business school, because I liked this approach of being more personal and more practice oriented, which it was. I didn't take so much with me from that, to be honest, because a business school is like business studies are very generalistic still, and also I think not made for entrepreneurs, because they usually talk about like huge corporations and obviously like economics, market economics, which is good to know, but doesn't help you so much if you're a lonely entrepreneur out there trying to start a new business. And but I learned a lot about how a small university works, and that it doesn't always have to be these like super huge public or even privately funded universities, because the one I went to was in Cologne and was a very small one back then, with about 300 students when I started. And so basically, like after a few weeks after starting my studies there, I asked myself why there isn't something like this business school, but for technology, like a tech school, let's say. And I took this idea with me for all those years, also as an employer, realizing that when I was looking for developers and designers, that the good ones were always self-taught. Some of them studied, but even the ones who studied, for example, computer science, said that their actual skill set was self-taught and stuff like that. And so I realized that there is seems to be not a really good program to prepare you for becoming a great software developer, or who's able to create good web applications and websites and apps these days. And I always had this idea in my mind, and then was like, after sellinglebenslauf.com, was able to through my own financial means, but also through all the stuff I've learned, this huge network I've built through the German Startups Association, to start this project. And most importantly, I found two great co-founders, Manuel Dolderer and Jonathan Rüth, who were very interested in education for a longer time and had experience in building up universities for their former employer already. And this is always something that was...
Which company builds up universities?
Klett. So Klett is the big German school book company, basically publisher.
They build up universities?
Yeah, they do a lot actually. They have a lot of different subsidiaries, and what many people also, basically no one I guess knows, is that all these Fernhochschulen, they're like remote universities, online universities, stuff like that, like ILS or EuroFH or SGD, all of them also belong to Klett, to the group, and they have kindergartens, they have schools, and they didn't have universities back then, and my two co-founders back then helped them to go into that field. They actually even bought my former university, the Cologne Business School, a few years ago. So that's very I think it's a very smart move, because they probably also anticipate that school books will change a lot in the next decade. Let's hope so, at least for us. And so they diversify. And so my co-founders made a lot of experience there, and then obviously knew much more about how to do all this bureaucratic stuff, how to get state recognition as a private university, and just in general we are a great team, and really work really well together. And that's why and when we started Code, which was like at the end of 2015, we did a lot of preparation in like getting it accredited, as I said, and obviously coming up with a didactical model and an idea of how exactly our studies can be much more practice-oriented and feel much more natural than like this typical approach to studying, and we developed a project-based teaching approach, which we implemented here, and then like in summer of 2017 got state recognition finally, and also a few months later already had our first 88 students starting with us. These days we're like 360 students, and in total I think like then another 50 people who work here now, a lot of external lecturers, obviously. And so a really cool community and ecosystem of very international and ambitious students who are like, most of them are very entrepreneurial also, because they basically, for them it's also very exciting to join such a young university, which is itself still kind of a startup.
Yeah.
And so that's basically what we're doing now, and happy to answer lots of questions about that.
So, do you like how much money you need to pay to attend the university?
Yeah. So what many people, at least in Germany, where people are used to free public education, don't get is that private universities don't get any financial support from the state. So whatever you do, you have to find the money for it yourself, and that means we either need students or companies to pay for it, basically, or you need a big philanthropist donor who just gives it out for free. But we didn't want that, because we wanted to stay independent and authentic. And at the same time, we are doing a lot of partnerships with companies, and companies are certainly helping a lot to finance the university. But for me, it was important that our actual, real main customers are the students themselves. So we can always act in their best interest. I think that's the most authentic way to do it. So we take tuition. Students can choose to either pay a monthly fee, which is these days about 850 euros. So in total, over like 3 years of studies, it's about 30,000 euros.
Yeah.
But most of our students don't choose that, but instead a model that we also offer from the very beginning on, which is a so-called income share agreement, pay later model, where you study for free and promise that the first 10 years after your studies, you give us a share of your income if you have a meaningful income. Meaningful income means about like at least 20,000 euros a year or more in net income, and then you give us about 8.5% to 10.5%, depending on some things. And that's a model that enables everyone to study with us, totally regardless of their financial or their parents' financial situation, and which is like super safe for you also, because like really, if you don't earn any money, you never have to pay us. So it fits very good also with careful German people. But as I said, fact is that nearly half of our students these days are actually not from Germany.
But how you keep this then running? You're so new. If most of the people choose the second option, that means you get paid later. Mm-hmm. So how do you pay the bills right now?
Mm-hmm. So instead of having like this one big investor / donor, we decided to go for like a large group of supporters and shareholders from the German startup scene. Mm-hmm. So through the network I've built over all those years, I approached a lot of successful founders, like the founder of Trivago, or the founders of Check24, or the founders of ResearchGate, and then like lots and lots of people like that, who gave us about 5 million euros. to build up this university, and that's the money we're still using.
Yeah.
At the same time, but that's more important even. We have a partner who helps us to finance these income share agreements. So they're called Chancengenossenschaft, and they are like interested in providing fair and socially responsible like pay later models to students, and they are basically helping us to pre-finance this, and this helps a lot because obviously otherwise we would need to invest millions and millions into waiting for the money.
Yeah, definitely cool and interesting story. But let's go back to Sevenload for a second. So when you started it, you were quite young, right? And you didn't have really experience how to lead a team. So did you first go bootstrap on that, or do you go right away for your friend, get investment, get a small team, and just scale the team? How was the approach there in the beginning?
Yeah, in the beginning, I like for I don't know, like a year at least or so, I was just the only developer, and my co-founder was the only other employee, so to say. And I worked for free, obviously. And I mean, the thing is, when you're so young, you're still living, like I was still living with my parents and stuff like that. So you basically have no costs at all. Yeah. That's a big advantage. So we basically bootstrapped it back then. But then we were actually like more or less proactively also approached by interested investors because the site became more and more successful, and then we started to take on this funding, and then obviously grew a lot. Actually, in hindsight, probably a little too much also because, as you said, I then more and more like we recruited more and more experienced managers. Yeah. Which was on one hand very good, and I obviously learned a lot from that, and they did a good job in many parts. But it also meant that at some point I myself as a founder gave up a lot of control and influence, because I mean when you take in so much money from investors, then obviously they have a lot of shares also, and then the other managers also have a very strong position, and that meant that I as a founder didn't feel as let's say as responsible in the end. And I think that's something that I swore to me that I never want to let happen again. That basically back then I only led the tech team at the end, basically. So was the CTO. Yeah. But all the other things were basically done by the other managers, and I think it's like these days, even, I mean, obviously also if you have co-founders, you split up the stuff, the areas, that's totally fine. And obviously you need to do that. And you obviously need to trust each other and give you a lot of freedom. But I think in the end, it's still super important that you as a founder feel overly responsible. So there needs to be someone who says it, like, if there's something going wrong in another department that I'm not responsible for, at some point you need to pull the plug and say basically, hey, this is not working, we need to fix it. So basically that was like a thing that happened because I was so inexperienced. But at the same time, I think what helped a lot is that that in many areas it also helped that I was so young, because people like this WizKid story. Like, I mean, Mark Zuckerberg was also super young. All of these like huge Silicon Valley founders are very young, and not always, but a lot of the time that also worked in Germany, and people believed in that and liked it, especially since I had a technical role, and I worked very hard and like basically all the time, but to me it didn't feel like work, because like creating great products, doing software development was always like also my main hobby. So actually when I look back, I realized that I worked basically 16 hours a day, 7 days a week for years. Yeah. But it didn't feel like that. So
And your co-founder mainly did the marketing and
PR,
and the whole
getting
thing.
investors on board in the beginning. Yeah.
And he was responsible for the traffic, getting the traffic on the web player side.
Yeah.
Because especially probably in the past it was easier to start that because there were not so many video platforms out there, so you got easier people on putting content in, putting pictures in, so you get it easier to start than probably today because YouTube dominating it.
Of course, I mean, it was like the whole landscape of interesting sites on the internet was much smaller.
Yeah.
And so that was obviously, that it has become much more competitive. At the same time, I mean, it never has been as easy as now to found a company. Like, it's much easier to get capital. It's much, like, you can read so many books and blogs and podcasts about it that didn't exist at all back then. But on the other hand, like, if you knew how to do it, it was much easier than now.
So how many people you had under you as you were CTO of Sevenload?
As a CTO, I was responsible for, I think, like 40 people or so.
40 people.
We were in total like 120, and when we sold the company, I was like 24 years old. Yeah.
And what did your co-founder, was he CEO or was he?
He was, he was kind of in the end, he mostly did a lot of like, let's say PR and business development. Okay. So he was like, using his networking skills out there, representing us and stuff like that.
So how did you learn to lead 40 people?
I don't know if I actually learned it. No, I'm not a good people manager, not until today. So what does that mean? I'm not very good in... I'm not very good in giving good feedback all the time, I think. Yeah. I'm more, since I'm so involved myself into development, I'm more the artist kind of guy, so I have like strong ideas of my own, and I sometimes, I think I'm a very calm guy, but I'm like, when I don't like something, I say it pretty clearly, like, this doesn't look good, and not like, but a good manager probably says like, thank you so much for putting in all of that work. I like your ideas a lot, but blah, blah, blah. So much more, let's say, diplomatic, like in general. And I think sometimes I'm a bit too straight for that. And don't give enough appreciation because I take a lot of things for granted. But why did it still work out and does today? I mean, because I learned that others are better at that and I should hire these people. Like, I should hire good, like, managers and find co-founders who are better at this. And back then, I think because I was leading by example. I think, as I said, I worked so hard, and I think I also did a very good job as a developer myself. I basically all the time I also programmed myself. I was software architect. And I think people looked up to me. Rare, so from a technical point of view, and they were all super young. They were all my age. So basically, so I think it worked because they looked up to me, because they respected me, and stuff like that, but not because I was a good manager.
Why you didn't hire an experienced developer? Because normally if you put a lot of young people together, mistakes happen. So why didn't you get like an old experienced programmer in, or it worked out? So.
Yeah. I think mostly because to build up this culture, also this culture of, I don't know, working on weekends. And I have to, as I said, back when looking at it now, I realized how intense it was. Back then,
it felt normal.
It felt normal. It was like we had so much fun together. We were friends. Like, and that's really interesting to realize now, looking back, that sometimes now I feel a little guilty that sometimes I ask people like, hey, are you coming in tomorrow on Saturday? I would never do that these days. And that's one thing when you work with very young people. And the other thing is, there weren't so many experienced developers in web development, in PHP, in JavaScript, in Ajax, whatever. So experience didn't help so much with these new kind of things.
That's a good point. And by the way, as an addition to your points about leading, there's a book called Radical Candor, which is pretty interesting. It's about a former manager of Google and Facebook, I think, or something. And she has an example there that, like Steve Jobs, there's a famous interview where he asked, like, okay, I heard from several people, they come with something to you and you say that's shit. But you normally don't need it. Like, they forget something to say, and no. And Steve Jobs said, no, if it was shit, I told him it's shit. So it's not about so much about like being super, like being this kind of fake nice to people. Honesty, straightness brings you a lot. I think it's at the end, it's about caring about your people, you know? It's not about like saying, oh, you did this good, but you can do better. No, it's being straight and probably just caring. If you care, you have it. And like, the book is long, it's worth read. Yeah. It's a good read. How did you guys make the decision to let Sevenload go? Like, how did you say, okay, cool, let's sell it?
That was actually like, it was two things for me and my co-founder. One of the main motivations were that, as I said, we lost a lot of influence on the company. So at some point, to us, it felt a bit like, not like we're the founders, but we're just part of the company. Yeah. So we had a lot of ideas on how to do things that we couldn't turn into reality because the other managers didn't like it, and then the investors also didn't like it and stuff like that. So it didn't feel like our company so much anymore. And at the same time, there was tough competition. I mean, through YouTube, for example. Back then, YouTube already belonged to Google and had basically endless financial resources and technical resources. And creating a video platform is very challenging technically, and also in terms of servers and bandwidth and traffic and all of that stuff. So it was very hard to compete with that. For example, I think up until 2011 or so, YouTube didn't show any ads. And then when the content creators, we also had a lot of like what you these days call YouTubers. Yeah. we had them like a lot of those back then on our platform, and did a lot with them and for them also. But when you have at some point to show ads in front of the videos, and they say, hey, but when I upload my stuff to YouTube, there's no ad. Then what do you say? Yeah. And so that's obviously a like
killer argument.
Let's say like a cross subsidy strategy that Google did there. So and on the other hand, the other video platforms that still existed back then all belonged to bigger TV companies like My Video or Clipfish to RTL and so they had a lot of content. And so it was very competitive at some point, and then we realized that overall it seems to be a good point in time to sell it now.
It's always hard decision, especially if it's your baby, because you build it up and you put a lot of time in. It's one of the hardest things to know when to let go. Mm-hmm. So that's definitely one of the arts of things to do. As you were into the political field, and you said it's quite different, can you elaborate a bit more? What was the difference? What did you learn about politics in comparison to the real startup world or the real world?
I think I mostly learned a lot about networks and people again, and how all of this comes together, how like opinions are formed. And for example, a lot of the time it seemed like, or I found out that politics is much simpler than one would think, and that if you know, like, I mean, it always depends, obviously, right? I mean, if you want to change a huge like law through parliament. I mean, that's much harder because there are like hundreds of people you have to influence basically. But for example, what we did for startups a lot is also like, for example, create grant programs to support like angel investors that invest in startups, or help the government to set up funds like the or to prolong funds like the high-tech Gründerfonds, and all of that stuff, or to increase the subsidiaries for the Exist Gründerstipendium, which is also a huge grant program for student founders. All of that stuff, that's usually stuff that doesn't go through parliament, but that's actually like more like created by the Ministry of Economics and stuff like that. And I learned a lot about how important the influential people in these ministries also are. Like the people who, because a lot of the time it's like, it's not like a minister comes up and says, we want to do this and that, but it's more like you need a minister who says basically, hey, I want to do more for founders and startups in Germany. Obviously, I mean, that's something he or she should say that's on their list. Yeah. And then employees from the ministry basically come up with ideas and say like, hey, I think we should create a program that gives angel investors 20% of their money back if they invest in startups. Yeah. And you need to find these people and support them internally so they can basically then turn it into reality.
Support means you write them documents, you help them to argument it in the correct way.
Exactly, you explain it to them. I mean, so a lot of the time, I mean, you know, luckily, I mean, we're lobbying for startups, not for tobacco. So I would say that, like, basically all of the time, what we're doing is a good thing for society and for Germany's economy as a whole. So we're promoting innovative entrepreneurship. We're promoting job creation and stuff like that. So that's a good thing. And a lot of the time, that's also something I realized before founding the association. A lot of the time, the politicians are just looking for someone to talk to, because an association is also, it's part of our democratic system, actually. That's something that I then understood more after having established it, that politicians need a democratically legitimized representative they can talk to. So before that, it was like a minister wanted to do something for startups, but then he and their people should probably talk to some founders to find out if it makes sense or if it's a totally stupid idea, because they are not experts in this business, right? But who do they talk to? If they then just randomly invite successful people, they did that sometimes in the past, like invite some successful founders. Yeah. But that's also very random. That's also not a very clean way to do it politically. I know what you mean. So they were super happy when we were there, because they said, wow, okay, cool, we have an official representative that we can like ask stuff, and they have their internal democratic methods, like that there's a board of entrepreneurs who's elected through the members of the association and stuff like that. And so they are basically, they have their, let's say, asses covered, that they did the right thing by asking the associations. And that's a big part of how this all works.
Yeah, that's a good point. So if you want to see a change, you should like build also a lobby for that like politicians have an easier way to access information and to go in an exchange than just random pick person. That's just makes sense. Yeah.
Not just like proactively tell them what to do, but be there for the ones who already want to do something but need someone to talk to. Exactly. And there were a lot of people in politics who wanted to do more for startups but didn't know how and who to talk to. And as soon as we were there, that was much easier.
Cool. So, what was the decision process you let Lebenslauf.com go, or let the gaming stuff go? Like, how did it come up there to say, okay, it's enough, I let it go?
The gaming company was because we had like less than 100,000 euros in the bank, and it was very hard to raise new capital, or we didn't feel comfortable to raise new capital on something that didn't work until then. The Lebenslauf.com thing was much more interesting, because back when I sold it, Until then, I had you like to download your PDF in the end. You had to pay a few euros, 5 euros or so, and I made a lot of revenue back then also already. So it made like, I don't know, 15,000 euros in profits per month or so. And so I had this decision of, hey, I could just let it run, 15,000 euros already, perhaps more success in the future per month in profits. Pretty nice if it's yours. Or
how did you make profit there? Like, did you let it pay the PDF export?
Yeah,
okay,
exactly. They could like do credit card, PayPal, and stuff like that, and so to get a PDF file.
Okay.
And for free was like only an online version, basically. Okay. And everybody wanted a PDF file, obviously. Yeah. So that was a very interesting decision, because you had to anticipate like, where could it go? Is it a smart move to sell it? But also I had to anticipate that I still like, it was a lot of fun, but I wanted to do something much bigger, like building a university, and it takes up your time also. Yeah. But with Xing, I had a deal that was very much focused on, it was pretty much like an affiliate deal. So we had a lot of milestones, and they said like, what they wanted to do with it, and are still doing, I think, is they didn't want to make money with it on its own, but they wanted to drive registrations for Xing. Yeah. Because they found out, like when we talked, that most of our users weren't users of their platform or yet. And obviously it makes a lot of sense. I mean, you create a CV, you turn in all the data that like a company like Xing also wants to have on their profiles. And Xing is free, so they have then other business models like the job market and so on. So they said basically, hey, just tell the users, hey, register at Xing for free, and you get your PDF also for free. That's
and then,
it.
Of course, they do that,
And then they basically offered me a deal where they said, for every registration that you drive within the next, I don't know, 2.5 years, you get a specific amount of money. And stuff like that. And so basically I had to sell it without knowing exactly what I will get for it in the end. I mean, I had like
that was the way you sold it.
There was a fixed price involved, but the fixed price was very low. And like, I don't know, like 95% of it was variable.
Did you do the same like did you also check competitor offers?
Yes, the competitor offers had a higher fixed price, but lower than the potential of the Xing deal, and most importantly, they required me. That was also a very important component, to be on site, to basically come to the office every day for 1.5 years. And Xing basically said, hey, we and that was a good thing in the end. They said, you're an entrepreneur. You you want to mostly work from home. I mean, Xing was in Hamburg, I was in Cologne still. You want to retain your freedom. So why not do a very entrepreneurial deal? That means like, the more successful you are, the more money you get. So, and that in general, I like their culture and their brand much more. I think selling to Xing is much cooler than selling to, I don't know, any other job company.
Plus a clean cut, It's a lot about to understand how an entrepreneur thinks, because I had the same. Like, I also sold a startup, and we wanted to have a clean cut, and all the other deals were, we can offer you more, but you need to make sure that this and this happens, and go with us. And if you want to have a clean cut, that's the opposite of what you want. You want to start something new, so you want a clean cut. So I completely understand you. So, but Xing said, okay, that's a milestone deal, and at the end we still have it. So, still you gave it to them.
And but the thing was, so I was very reluctant to do it, because when you turn something that costs money into a free product, then obviously you probably have a lot more customers. But the question was, how many more? Because I didn't have any clue how many people would do this then. But Xing was reluctant to, I don't know, do some kind of pilot test and so on. I think just because they wanted to have the deal done quickly, and then at some point I did a very risky thing, so to say. I decided, because I delayed my decision. Then I came up with the idea that on one weekend, like, I don't know, in the spring of 2014, I created a fake Xing registration on lebenslauf.com instead of having to pay. So basically it looked like the thing we were going for, like, hey, you can download your PDF, just enter your data here to register Xing. But it was
data protection was kind of dangerous.
It was before GDPR.
Log into your Xing account here, please.
It was totally like the form didn't work at all. So it basically said, when you did that, it sent you an email saying that, hey, there was an error creating your Xing account, but here's your PDF. Yeah. I also gave up about, I don't know, like 2,000 euros of revenue that weekend. But I found out that, like, before that, like, little less than 20% of the people who used the site paid. After that, it was 90%. And then I saw the numbers and I thought, like, oh my God, let's do the deal. And that's how it happened. And I'm very happy also with, like, how it all turned out, how I worked together with Xing. They're very nice people and culture.
Really cool. Yeah. What also come to my mind is you are now on a completely different position with different responsibilities, different things to do right now than before. So do you have still side projects? So what do you do? Where you're one-man army?
Yeah, I would love to. No, actually, sometimes these days it's more and more difficult, and it's mostly because we don't find other people. Sometimes I still do programming on our university website. Yeah. It was created by me, designed and developed in the beginning, and sometimes now when we need to add some things, it's still me who jumps in. But other than that, I do some angel investments. So I have I don't know, about 10 or 15 angel investments who, like, require some time from me, like some consulting meeting with the founders from time to time, but not so much. And then I still voluntarily do stuff for the German Startups Association. Yeah. And then, I don't know, here and there some other volunteer stuff, like for the Entrepreneurs Organization and so on, but that's it. So it's basically really like 90% university.
Yeah. So the next question is, what are your favorite books?
Actually, I don't read books at all in the last years, which is very sad. And I feel bad about it because there's so many interesting books I want to read. We can talk about that. But I basically read none during the last years because I just didn't take the time. When I came home, I was like, I wanted to focus on private stuff and relax a little more, and other than that, I had so much to do. Yeah. Stuff I definitely want to read is like all the typical founders books you read about, and I've heard a lot about. For example, The Hard Thing About Hard Things, From Zero to One. Yeah. I have on my table, but not yet read. Let's see, the new book from Ben Horowitz. I think it's about company culture. Yeah, that's something I think a lot about these days.
I will search the title and put it in. I don't get the name right now.
I definitely want to read because company culture is a very important thing all the time and very demanding also when running a university, which is so much about people. Yeah. And and in general, I think I'm not a good example of when it comes to books.
Yeah, it's not about that. Like it's only about the curiosity and like educate yourself. And you can also educate yourself in asking people like what to do. So what I like to do is I don't like to read myself as well. I'd like to listen more to audiobooks. Mm-hmm. So what I always do, I always have in washing stuff, cooking stuff, and going from A to B, I always have audio stuff in the background and then go from there. And sometimes podcasts, sometimes certain books. And this is my way to go into that. But it's also really effective to choose your book sometimes on some things you have in your mind. So where you say, okay, I want to learn more about culture, then go directly in that, and then keep the random stuff in there, like random stuff from the side, where you like. In a different podcast, someone said like he does it really extensively. So he read a book about ISIS, he read a book about like how the boxes of ships, like the how you call this containers, how they changed the world more than internet. So it's where I say, okay, interesting. I never heard about it. So that's a way to go about it. And
I also like what I do is I read a lot online. Which is not as deep as reading a whole book, but stuff like Hacker News I read daily, Reddit also, some subreddits and stuff like that. So I try to get a lot of like inspiration, and I also pretty much know always what's going on, what's trendy, and if something then interests me, I dig deeper. That's how I do it these days.
Yeah, cool. And the last question: if you could go back in time to your 18-year-old self, what would you tell him?
So one thing I already mentioned, that is don't give up too much control and responsibility, even if you feel young. So basically, sometimes don't underestimate yourself and don't undersell yourself, because people can also like what happened is also that people basically use the fact that you're so young to get, I don't know, more shares in your company or whatever. So use that against you and be careful with that. I'm not sure. I think there's a lot of stuff where I would say I think I did right, which I would definitely recommend to others again, which is build a network, go out there, talk to others, don't be reluctant about that, don't be shy in sharing your ideas. Then the other thing is to find co-founders and to make them friends essentially. So I was always much better in a team than without others. And that is something that I really recommend to anyone. And then to follow your passion. I mean, for me, I don't know if it came across like this, but if you follow what I did, it's actually always like what I wanted to do. So video platform was also because I was interested in this and the technology, and then gaming because I wanted to do gaming, and the Lebenslauf thing, resume thing was something that came out of a friend, and the university obviously is my own life story, so to say. So I was never the guy who was super analytical about, okay, what can I build that makes the most money or that has the most customers. I did it differently, and for me that worked out very well.
Cool.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.